This is a picture of a problem. These are the people who have created that problem. This is that problem's manifestation. Predicting the future of this image is the key to predicting the future of financial assets. What's coming next is the great devaluation. We are now 1 minute to midnight. A black swan event is imminent. In the last 30 years, the top 1% has gained $21 trillion in wealth. This may sound like a lot until compared to the bottom 50%, who during the same time have lost $900 billion. Then this number becomes obscene. 4 decades of central bank monetary manipulation, lower and lower interest rates, and free money have all flowed to the very top. According to Forbes magazine, the top 20 people in the world are worth $1.31 trillion. According to the Federal Reserve, the bottom 3.75 billion people are worth $1.3 trillion. Which means that 20 people in the world are worth the bottom half of the world combined. If these numbers don't scare you, they should. They represent an unsustainable math problem. We have seen this movie before. In 1929, easy monetary policies had pushed wealth into the hands of just a few. The wealth gap was the largest in human history. It led to anger, which led to the election of populist leaders. These leaders adopt policies of nationalism and tariffs. That easy money led to massive asset bubbles. The Roaring '20s saw stocks quadruple. The Warren Buffett indicator, which measures the market cap to GDP ratio, hit 141% in 1929. The signs today are exactly the same. Today, the Warren Buffett indicator is at 155%. The stock market has increased 4 times in the last decade. Populism has led to anger, has led to nationalism. Donald Trump has become known as Tariff Man Trump around the world. What's coming next is the great devaluation. We are now 1 minute to midnight. A black swan event is an event so big it changes the entirety of mankind's perspective. Black swans are characterized by their extreme rarity and impact. These events cause catastrophic damage to the economy and cannot be predicted by any standard forecasting tools. Black swans, by definition, are unpredictable. At least that's conventional wisdom. The Etruscans were a civilization that ruled Italy for 900 years. They believed otherwise. They believed black swans were completely predictable and that they would happen every 90 years. The Etruscans believed that everything in life is cyclical, that life has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The human life follows this same construct. We go from childhood to young adults, to mature adults, and to old age. So that rather than look at our lives as linear and on a straight line, we should view them as circular, They called this cycle the saculum, which means a long life, made up of 4 generations, roughly 22 years apart, equaling 90 years. The Etruscans understood the supercycle. The idea behind the saculum was that mankind was bound to make the same mistakes over and over again, because there would be no first-hand witness left alive to remind him of his mistakes of the past. They marked their calendars not in 100-year increments. They marked their calendars from crisis moment to crisis moment. These events happened every 90 years. If you think the idea of the saculum sounds crazy, simply look at American history. 1776, the Revolutionary War. 1864, the Civil War. 1945, one saculum later, the end of World War II. These wars were resets. They were the results of crisis moments that had played out in the decade prior. The supercycle is turning. We are at that crisis moment once again. The stock market collapse that began the Great Depression was 90 years ago. The great devaluation coming in the 2020s will witness the largest transfer of wealth in human history. Currencies will be devalued. This devaluation will cause a collapse. Gold will surge to unthinkable new highs. Government actions and regulations will be taken to defend against the depression. In order to really identify the coming black swan, we need to put on the correct lens from which to view the world. There's a very good reason why man continues to make the same mistakes. The problem begins with the human brain. Our brains are designed to recognize concrete things, people, places, objects. Our brains do not comprehend the idea of exponential growth. We are quick to perceive the dramatic. We overlook long-term trends and consequences. To highlight the point, let's consider a deadly virus inside a glass that's growing exponentially. And that once the glass is full, the deadly virus will be completely uncontainable. If we start with one bacteria that doubles every minute, where at midnight the glass will be completely full, what time will it be when the glass is half full? The average person on the street guesses 11:30 p.m. Notice that for the first 55 minutes of the experiments, we don't see anything at all inside the glass. The deadly bacteria are too small. We don't recognize exponential growth because we can't see it. It's only at 5 minutes to midnight we notice anything. It isn't until 1 minute to midnight that we realize the glass is half full. But to our simplistic, concrete minds, half full also means half empty. Even at this late stage, we see the problem as 50% removed. We don't recognize exponential growth as it's occurring. To identify the problem, we've added a curve to the bottom of the experiment. This line is called an asymptote. An asymptote is a curve on an x or y axis that at some point shoots towards infinity. Once the curve hits the asymptote, It's too late to control. This chart also highlights the second challenge of man. We base our future expectations on our recent experience with the past. So when looking at this problem, we aren't looking at the exponential growth happening before our very eyes. We're looking at the first 95% of the experiment, expecting it to be the same. We do not recognize the doubling occurring before our very eyes. Now, I want to highlight an asymptote, a deadly virus that has now become uncontainable. This is the debt of the United States. Can you identify the asymptotes? Donald Trump is on pace to double the debt of Obama, who doubled the debt of Bush, who doubled the debt of Clinton. What's alarming is that this has happened in what is widely being called the greatest economy in history. Last year, the United States ran a budget deficit of $1.2 trillion, which begs a very important question. If this is how we run our budgets in the very best of times, how big will our budget deficits become when things become less great? We are about to learn the lessons of thousands of years of finance. We cannot borrow our way into growth. In fact, at this point, growth becomes an obstacle. The more we grow, the more we owe. Any organic growth at these levels mean higher interest rates. Higher interest rates mean higher cost to service debt. Any real growth will be immediately knocked down by this higher interest cost. We started the presentation with this image. I told you it was the key to understanding the future of financial assets. Pay attention, because we have come full circle. In the 1930s, interest rates averaged 0.63%. By the late 1970s, interest rates had swung to the other side of the pendulum at highs of 20%. We, over the last decade, have had interest rates that have averaged 0.63%. The circle is now complete. Through the process, we learn a few things. Monetary policies are really socialism for the wealthy. They drive wealth into the hands of a few. Fiscal policies do the opposite. Fiscal policy drives wealth away from the few into the hands of the many. The fiscal programs launched in the 1930s continued, and as you can see, by the 1970s, the wealth distribution was the most even in history. Of course, over the last 45 years, we have swung back in the opposite direction. Interest rates again are on the floor. Monetary policy has pushed the wealth back into the hands of a few. Mark Twain famously said, "History may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme." If you're trying to predict what comes next, allow history to be your guide. This is where we are today. This is what's coming. Central banks have created an unsustainable math problem. Does this current wealth line look familiar? What do you think comes next? The great devaluation of the 2020s will witness the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. My name's Adam Barata. Thank you for your time.